Hello, this is my first proposition speech in response to the first motion that states, this House supports BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, next big emerging markets countries, creating alternatives to the current international economic institutions, i.e. the IMF, the World Bank, and WTO. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Vulnerable economies are trapped under the model of dominant Western capitalism. Their needs are often dismissed on the basis of the guise of these institutions, mere humanitarian agendas that are so vague they exert little to no influence on actual society. I'm first going to start off by contextualizing and characterizing why and how these international economic institutions were created in the first place, then move on to justify why BRICS are valid in pursuing alternatives for other countries to pursue economic growth. So, firstly, corporations like the IMF and World Bank are organizations that are established frameworks aimed at stabilizing the global economy through giving financial loans to countries that most need it, normally. They essentially reflect the economic situation of the 1930s and 40s, after World War II, when general economies were just collapsing, right? It's a universal truth is say that historically, financial instability was very generalized, and IMF and World Bank and WTO stepped out to prevent such economic crises from flaming. These organizations involve monetary input from all its members, and any unpaid debt from loans given to recipients accumulates at the hands of these countries that receive this money. But essentially, the point here is that these institutions have become very outdated in the kind of economic problems they deal with. Merely, this looks like looks like giving loans to countries that request them, but never actually following up and keeping track on whether they're using this money properly and whether developing countries are actually maximizing the utility of their resources. Firstly, the Western financial system does not actually deal with actual development. There are no physical means of sustaining or developing the human population after the country receives loans. Money can be used in a variety of ways. It does not always have to be devoted to education and medicine, which is the case that many countries use this money to fuel political corruption. Countries then accumulate debt due to this vicious cycle of sanctioning and freezing their own assets under the legal system. This allows for the vicious cycle of the domination of the dollar. Countries are trapped into this model of receiving loans, but never actually is able to pay back debt, pay back money. Due to arbitrary expenditure and the guise of humanitarian aid, societal progress is often undefined and very vague. The second point under this is that IMF is structurally problematic. It's very hierarchical, so if you're a small country and you have little determination over how resources are going to be distributed with the voting power you acquire. This incapacity to request for meaningful change demonstrates why institutions like the BRICS should be able to pursue alternative methods of encouraging growth otherwise. The first argument that we give on such opposition is a joint economic coalition is the most pragmatic path for integration. The first point under this is that these economic institutions are very similar to the IMF and the idea of a multilateral development bank. They mobilize resources for infrastructure for these developing and emerging economies, but normally they have also unique features that separate them from traditional Western entities. This is like more thorough dialogue between member states because of building regional connections and nominate political figures, for instance, from the global south to articulate economic problems. It has more integrity in the kind of issues being presented, and normally these economic issues like poverty, inequality can resonate with the BRICS that have also previously dealt with similar issues. This allows for either faster and more coherent problem solving on our side, in which money is not only given but also maximized due to the utility of what we have. Urban development projects, i.e. environmental aid and money used to repair after natural disasters are all examples of which we can actually bring about evident changes in modern industrialization for countries overall. The second argument is why BRICS is the most suitable stakeholder to exert such influence. They're an up-and-coming economic superpower. You see countries like China and Brazil are rich with natural resources and have significant influence over the technological sector. They're often named as a threat to Western overlords, and this is true to the extent they have access to cutting-edge technology and intellectual property available for distribution on our side. They also have an incentive that motivates them to maximize stock market earnings and distribute their own resources, right? They have established ties with countries like Bangladesh and other developing countries in the South that can emerge in the near future, and that diplomatic relations will then be founded or be extended on the basis of this bank. So this means that these countries will capitalize on expanding their own labor opportunities at a faster pace, and with more helpful mechanisms that can help them to do so. Right. This also suggests long-term progress for members and the recognition of these BRIC countries to exert such influence, making stuff like growth easier through an external support system during economic crises. Also, internal incentives for countries to invest money in local institutions to attract FDI, which is probably more likely to appeal to the BRICS, which have an incentive to, for instance, expand foreign currency to challenge Western traditional economies. The second point here is that it's justified and effective, right? There's a duty for BRICS to offer these alternatives in the first place, in the sense that they have become developed or more developed at the expense of other countries that have been weeded out of technological competition because of things like automation, exploiting other labor sectors, etc. Now they can promote accessibility to the same capital that other countries want through these economic institutions. They gain political support in international legislation, and in the long run, they have a voice and can solidify southern economic stronghold by outsourcing resources to these other countries. We think there's less of an incentive than for exploitation, in which it's costly to economically colonize other countries, and it's probably more going to look like these countries sustaining support for collective and individual interests versus the IMF, which is very individual, and there's an inherent imbalance between the interests of the IMF, which is to challenge and dominate as opposed to developing countries that merely want humanitarian aid. We think on our side there's a balance between what the interests of these two countries, and can do things like tap into more progressive sides of ambitious projects versus subsistence on side opposition. And on our side, there's also proof that the BRIC bloc can be economically influential and not suppressive on the status quo. This breaks away from news media portrayal of countries like China being inherently oppressive so this all provides an opportunity to flip that narrative on our side, and it allows for greater chances for industrialization and to resolve current economic problems, etc., which we believe is a general value in this debate. So we achieve the goal of IMF through better ways, more effective means of economic loaning. So thank you for listening.